Chapter 1 Approach. The hum was the only god in this kingdom. A steady, reassuring thrum of four engines spinning at 35,000 feet. A sound that held a universe of 488 souls suspended between a cobalt sky and a blanket of unbroken white clouds. In the cockpit of Oceanic Flight 815, Captain Eva Molnar rested her hand on the throttle quadrant. The plastic was warm, alive. She tracked the instrument displays, her gaze sweeping from altitude to airspeed, from engine performance to navigation. Everything was nominal, perfect. A long, quiet haul over the Pacific. Another 5 hours of this and I might actually finish my crossword, First Officer Ben Carter said, his voice a low murmur beside her. He stretched in his seat, the fabric groaning in protest. Eva offered a slight smile without turning her head. Don't get too comfortable. Turbulence over the Philippines is almost a guarantee. A little shake-up would be welcome, anything to break the monotony. Eva's eyes flickered to a small, framed photo tucked into the side of her instrument panel. A smiling girl with a missing front tooth. Her daughter, Maya. A silent promise she renewed on every flight. Get home safe. She keyed the intercom. Cabin crew, this is the captain. We're beginning our approach into the evening sector. Expect a smooth ride for the next few hours. A crisp, professional voice answered instantly. Copy that, Captain. All secure in the cabin. Kenji Tanaka, senior attendant, a man who found comfort in the rigid structure of his job. Down in business class, Dr. Lena Hansen offered a cup of water to the man in seat 12D. He had been gripping his armrest since takeoff, his knuckles white. Deep breaths, she coached, her voice calm and even, the same tone she used in the emergency room to talk down panicked patients. It's safer up here than on the highway. Further in the cabin, David Chen jabbed at the screen of his tablet, his face illuminated by its cold blue light. He was composing another scathing article, a takedown of a corporate merger. His fingers flew across the glass, each word a carefully aimed dart. The woman beside him coughed, a dry, papery sound. He shot her an irritated glance before returning to his work, oblivious to anything beyond his own sphere of importance. It started without warning, not with a shudder but with a silence. One of the engine indicators on Eva's display went blank. Not red, not amber, just off. A black square where a river of green data had been flowing. Ben, you see that? Engine 3, Eva said, her voice sharp, instantly shedding its placid tone. Ben leaned forward. What the hell? Comms failure to the sensor. Then Engine 1 went blank, followed by 2 and 4, a cascade of black squares. The steady hum of the engines did not change, yet the instruments screamed they were gone. A contradiction, a physical impossibility. I have no engine data, Eva announced, her hands already moving, flipping switches, trying to reroute power to the displays. Nothing. Master caution alarm isn't even triggering. A light appeared outside the cockpit windshield. It was not the sun. It was a searing, violet-white glow that bleached all color from the world. It pulsed, a silent heartbeat in the empty sky. What is that? Ben breathed, his hand shielding his eyes. The plane began to shake. Not the gentle rock of turbulence, but a violent, bone-jarring vibration, as if the aircraft were being torn apart by invisible hands. Alarms, silent until now, shrieked to life, a cacophony of digital screams. In the cabin, passengers were thrown against their restraints, trays clattered. A genuine scream ripped through the air. Eva fought the controls. The yoke bucked in her hands, unresponsive. She was flying a ghost. The violet light outside intensified, burning through the cockpit, turning everything into a stark, overexposed photograph. For a moment she saw not the instrument panel, but a twisted landscape of shattered metal and fire. She saw her own hands, not on the yoke, but impaled on a shard of broken glass, blood streaming down her arms. The image was gone in a flash, replaced by the violent glare. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The light vanished, the shaking stopped, the alarms fell silent. The only sound was the steady, impossible hum of 4 engines that, according to the dead displays, did not exist. Eva's heart hammered against her ribs. She took a breath, then another. Ben was pale, his eyes wide. "Report," she commanded, her voice a strained rasp. I don't know. All systems are offline except propulsion. We're flying blind." He tapped a dead screen. "Comms are out, no radio, no satellite." Eva took the controls. The plane responded. It was still flying. She nudged it into a gentle descent, breaking through the cloud layer. They needed to see where they were, if they were. The clouds parted. Below them was not the endless blue of the Pacific Ocean. It was land, and on that land was an airport, a massive, sprawling international hub, its runways stretching for miles. In the center, a gleaming, modern terminal building stood under the afternoon sun. Eva stared. It was impossible. Their navigation was dead, but she knew their position. They should be thousands of miles from any landmass this size. "Where are we?" Ben whispered. Eva ignored him. Her focus narrowed on the airport. It was perfect, pristine. But something was profoundly wrong. She scanned the aprons, the taxiways, the gates. There were no other planes, no ground crew in yellow vests, no baggage carts trundling across the tarmac, no signs of life whatsoever. The jet bridges stood empty, sterile arms reaching for aircraft that were not there. Her hands tightened on the yoke. Below them lay a city of steel and glass, and it was as quiet as a tomb. "Oceanic 815 to anyone," she said into the dead radio, a useless prayer. "We are declaring an emergency. We are making an unscheduled landing." The only reply was the low, steady hum of the engines, pulling them down toward the silent world below. Chapter 2: The Silent Terminal. The landing was the smoothest of Eva's career. The superjumbo's wheels kissed the asphalt of the main runway with a gentle squeal, the immense weight of the aircraft settling onto solid ground. Eva guided the plane down the runway, the automated braking systems failing to engage. She used the reverse thrusters, their roar a sacrilege in the profound silence. She steered the colossal machine onto a taxiway, her eyes scanning the empty gates, searching for any flicker of movement, any person. There was nothing. She brought the plane to a halt near the international terminal, the engines spooling down into an unnerving quiet. For a long moment, no one in the cockpit moved. The absence of sound was heavier than the earlier chaos. "Checklists," Eva ordered, her voice cutting through the stillness. They went through the shutdown procedure from memory, their actions rote, mechanical. "What do we tell them?" Ben asked, gesturing vaguely toward the cabin behind them. "The truth. We don't know where we are, but we are on the ground and we are safe." The word safe felt like a lie in her mouth. She switched on the cabin address system, hoping it still worked. It did. "This is your captain speaking." Her voice echoed through the silent plane. "As you are aware, we experienced a significant technical malfunction. Our navigation and communication systems are offline. We have landed at an unidentified airport. Please remain in your seats while we assess the situation." A nervous murmur rippled through the passengers. Eva unbuckled herself and stood. "Ben, stay here. Try to get any system back online. Anything." She walked into the cabin. Kenji Tanaka met her at the door, his face a mask of professional calm, but his eyes betrayed a deep-seated fear. "Captain, are we?" "We're alive, Kenji. That's what matters. I want you and your crew to prepare for deplaning. Orderly, calmly." In the cabin, Lena Hansen was already moving through the aisles, checking on people. She had a small gash on her forehead which she had ignored. She gave a calming smile to a frightened child, her presence a small island of stability. David Chen was on his feet, his phone held up, recording. "This is unbelievable," he muttered to his device. "Complete incompetence. They've landed us in the middle of nowhere. Lawsuits. There will be lawsuits." Eva ignored him. Her priority was the 487 other souls on her plane. She made her way to the main exit. With the help of the cabin crew, she operated the manual release for the door. It hissed open. The jet bridge was perfectly aligned, as if waiting for them, yet she knew no one had guided them in. She stepped out, her shoes echoing on the metal floor. The air was still, sterile, smelling faintly of ozone and clean plastic. The terminal was a cathedral of silence, vast, modern, and utterly deserted. Sunlight streamed through massive glass walls, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The departure boards were frozen, displaying flight information for a day that had already passed. A Starbucks stand was fully stocked, its espresso machines gleaming, its pastries sitting under glass domes. Not a single person was in sight. Baggage carousels were motionless. Security checkpoints were unmanned. Slowly, cautiously, the passengers began to file out of the plane. They gathered in a loose, stunned herd in the main concourse, their whispers and shuffled feet the only sounds. "My phone has no signal," a teenager announced, his voice trembling. A chorus of confirmations followed. No service, no Wi-Fi, they were completely cut off. "This has to be some kind of drill," David Chen declared, projecting his voice for everyone to hear. "A quarantine, maybe. They've diverted us to some black site. Military." He scoffed, trying to project an air of cynical authority. "Pathetic." Lena Hansen walked over to Eva, her expression grim. "I've done a quick sweep. No injuries apart from scrapes and bruises, but we have several passengers who need regular medication. Diabetics, heart conditions. We have some medical supplies on the plane, but they won't last forever." "We'll organize a search," Eva said. "There must be a pharmacy here, a clinic." As she spoke, it happened. The world blinked. For a single, violent second, the clean, sunlit terminal was gone. In its place was a maelstrom of screaming wind, the smell of jet fuel, and an intense, searing heat that scorched the skin. A high-pitched shriek of tearing metal filled the air. Eva saw the face of the man next to her contort in a silent scream, his skin blistering. Then it was over. The terminal was back. The sunlight, the silence. Everyone froze. A collective gasp went through the crowd. "What was that?" someone cried out. "The pressure, my ears," another shouted. David Chen staggered, shaking his head. A sudden pressure drop. The building's air systems must be failing. "I told you this place was a dump." He tried to sound dismissive, but his face was slick with a sudden sweat. Eva knew it was more than that. The heat she had felt was real. The smell of fuel, it was the same smell from her flash of vision in the cockpit. Her hand went to her arm, half expecting to see a burn. The skin was fine. She exchanged a look with Lena, whose face was a mask of clinical confusion. Lena touched the gash on her forehead, her eyes wide. She, too, had felt it. A child, the young son from the O'Connell family, pointed a trembling finger toward the massive glass wall overlooking the tarmac. His face was white. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice thin. "Look, the man." Every head turned. Standing on the empty tarmac about 50 yards from the terminal was a figure. A man in a passenger's clothes, a simple polo shirt and slacks. He was perfectly still, his back to them, staring out at the runway where they had landed. A man from the crowd, a passenger from economy named Mark, pushed forward. His face was draining of all color. That's me," he stammered. "He's wearing my clothes, that's my shirt." Everyone stared from Mark, standing amongst them, to the identical figure outside. The man on the tarmac did not move. He was a perfect statue, a silent, impossible duplicate, a stillborn echo in a dead world. Chapter 3: Echoes and Accusations. The presence of the duplicate, the echo, sent a fresh wave of panic through the survivors. People backed away from Mark as if he were diseased. He stood trembling, his eyes wide with a terror that defied logic. "It's a trick," David Chen barked, his voice straining to sound confident. He held up his phone, zooming in on the figure. "It's a mannequin, or some airport worker trying to spook us. This is a psychological operation. I've read about these things." "It's not a mannequin," Lena Hansen said, her voice low and steady. She never took her eyes off the figure. "It's breathing. Watch the shoulders. A slow, regular rise and fall." She was right. A subtle, almost imperceptible motion animated the distant figure. It was alive, or it appeared to be. Sarah Jenkins, the missionary, began to pray aloud, her words a frantic murmur. "Deliver us from evil, for thine is the kingdom." A few others joined her, their voices a desperate chorus. Eva stepped forward, raising her voice to cut through the rising hysteria. "Everyone, stay calm. We don't know what that is. No one goes outside. We stay together." "I'm going out there," David announced. He tucked his phone into his pocket. "Someone has to get answers, and it's clear our so-called captain is happy to sit here and wait. I'm going to find out who that is." "No," Eva commanded. "That's an order." David laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. You're not my captain anymore. We're not on your plane. You have no authority here." He turned and strode toward the glass doors leading to the tarmac. A few people gasped, but no one moved to stop him. He was a force of arrogant certainty in a room full of doubt. Lena stepped in his path. "Don't be an idiot, David. We just experienced a shared, violent hallucination. We don't know the rules here." "There are no rules, Doctor. There's just reality. And the reality is that's a man on the tarmac and I'm going to talk to him." He pushed past her. The automatic doors slid open with a soft, accommodating hiss. David stepped out into the open air. The sun was bright, the air still. He walked across the concrete, his steps the only sound. The crowd in the terminal watched, holding a collective breath. He approached the still figure from behind. He slowed, his bravado seeming to shrink with the closing distance. He was a few feet away. He reached out a hand, slowly, hesitantly. He was about to touch the Echo's shoulder. The world ended again. This time the flicker was longer, more complete. The clean terminal did not just vanish. It was violently replaced. They were on the side of a mountain, the air screaming with wind and freezing cold. The ground was a jagged hellscape of dirt, rock, and twisted, smoking metal. The fuselage of Flight 815 was ripped open like a tin can, its pieces scattered across the slope. Bodies, broken and burned, were strewn everywhere, strapped into their seats or flung across the wreckage. Eva saw her own corpse in the cockpit, impaled and lifeless, just as she had glimpsed before. Lena saw the man from 12D, his body contorted, his face a mask of his final terror. Everyone saw their own death. They saw the bodies of their friends, their family. The smell of burning plastic and cooked meat choked the air. Screams echoed, not from the living, but from the memory of the event itself, imprinted on the very air of the place. It lasted 5, maybe 6 seconds, an eternity of horror. Then just as violently, they were back in the terminal. The sun was warm, the air clean. The return to normalcy was the most sickening part. One moment they were in hell. The next, they were standing on polished linoleum, the phantom smell of smoke still burning in their nostrils. David Chen was gone. The space he had occupied on the tarmac was empty. The echo of Mark was also gone. Inside the terminal, Mark, the real Mark, let out a piercing shriek and collapsed, his body convulsing on the floor. People scrambled away from him, their faces etched with a new, deeper understanding of their predicament. This was not a dream. This was not a hallucination. Lena rushed to Mark's side, her medical instincts overriding her own shock. "Give him space," she yelled. Mark's eyes were wide, unseeing. He clawed at his arm, screaming. "It burns, it burns." Sarah Jenkins fell to her knees. He took him. The demon took his soul. Eva's mind raced, trying to stitch the pieces together. The vision, David's disappearance, Mark's pain. She ran to the security checkpoint where a bank of monitors showed feeds from around the airport. Most were static, but one was live. It showed a desolate stretch of runway at the far end of the airfield. Her blood ran cold. There, lying on the cracked asphalt, was David Chen. His body was twisted at an impossible angle, his limbs bent the wrong way. He was motionless. Around him, scattered on the ground, were pieces of debris, A chunk of wing, a shattered window, a piece of the Oceanic Airlines logo. It was a fragment of the crash site, somehow pulled into this reality. David was dead. He had not simply vanished. He had been transported to his own place of death. Eva felt a hand on her arm. It was Lena. Her face was pale, but her eyes were sharp, analytical. "Look at this," Lena said, her voice barely a whisper. She pointed to Mark, who had stopped seizing and was now weeping softly. On his forearm, a dark, angry red welt was forming. It was a burn, shaped like a handprint. "He wasn't burned before," Lena stated. "David touched the other one, he touched the echo, and Mark got burned." She looked up at Eva, the terrifying conclusion dawning on both of them. Whatever happens in that other place, the crash site, it's real. The two realities are connected, and we are caught in the middle. Chapter 4: The Voice Recorder. The death of David Chen shattered the last vestiges of denial. He had not been a popular man, but his demise was a brutal confirmation of their circumstances. He had touched the impossible, and it had erased him. The survivors huddled in the main concourse, the initial shock giving way to a creeping, profound dread. Factions began to coalesce. Lena Hansen gathered a small group around her, tending to the injured and trying to maintain a semblance of rational order. Sarah Jenkins led a growing number of followers in fervent prayer, their whispers a constant, desperate sound in the cavernous hall. The rest were simply lost, adrift in a sea of fear. Eva knew they could not stay passive. They needed information. The key, she reasoned, had to be the plane. It was the vessel that had carried them here, the source of the anomaly. "Ben is dead," she announced to a small group she had pulled aside. Lena, Kenji Tanaka, and a quiet, intense man named Marcus Cole, who had introduced himself as an aeronautical engineer. "David is dead. We are not safe here. We are not safe anywhere. But the flight recorders on that plane might tell us what happened. I'm going back to the cockpit." "It's too dangerous, Captain," Kenji said, his professionalism finally cracking. "Those things are out there. Staying here and waiting for what comes next is more dangerous," Marcus countered, his eyes glinting with a morbid curiosity. "The VDR and FDR, if they recorded the event, the data could be invaluable. I can help you retrieve them." "I'm coming too," Lena said. "You might need a doctor." Eva nodded. "All right. Kenji, you're in charge here. Keep everyone together. Barricade the main doors after we leave. Don't open them for anyone but us." The four of them, Eva, Lena, and Marcus, slipped out a side door back into the unnerving stillness of the tarmac. The sun was lower in the sky now, casting long, distorted shadows across the concrete. In the distance, they could see another echo. This one was a woman in a flight attendant's uniform, standing motionless beside a baggage cart. They gave it a wide berth, their hearts pounding with every step. The walk to Flight 815 felt like crossing a minefield. The plane was a silent giant. They climbed the stairs of the jet bridge, their footsteps echoing. Inside, the cabin was dark and cold. The familiar space was now alien, haunted by the memory of its recent passengers. They moved quickly toward the front. The cockpit was just as they had left it, a capsule of dead technology. Marcus went to work immediately, his movements precise and efficient. He opened a panel in the floor, exposing a tangle of wires and electronics. "The recorders are designed to withstand almost anything," he explained, his voice low. "Fire, impact, pressure. If anything survived, they did." After a few minutes of work, he pulled out a bright orange box, the size of a shoebox. The cockpit voice recorder. "Let's see what we've got," he said, connecting it to a small, battery-powered diagnostic tool from his carry-on. The speaker crackled to life. First, there was the mundane chatter of the flight, Eva and Ben discussing weather patterns. Then, the moment of the anomaly. Static, a sharp intake of breath from Ben. "Eva, Ben, you see that? Engine 3. Ben, what the hell? Comms failure to the sensor." A series of electronic chimes, then a rising hum. "Ben, what is that?" Eva strained. "I don't have control." A deafening shriek filled the speaker, the sound of metal under impossible stress. It was mixed with human screams from the cabin, a chorus of pure terror. And underneath it all, a new sound. A deep, grinding, rhythmic noise. It was mechanical, but it was also organic. It sounded like a colossal machine chewing on rock and bone. As the horrifying sound filled the tiny cockpit, the lights on the instrument panel began to flicker. Not randomly, but in time with the grinding rhythm from the recording. "Shut it off," Lena whispered, her face pale. Before Marcus could react, the cockpit windshield dissolved. It didn't break. It warped into a strobing, nightmarish collage of images. They saw the mountain crash site, but it was in motion. They saw shredded aluminum, burning seats, and fractured human limbs, all churning together in a vortex of violence. The grinding sound from the recorder was coming from this vortex. It was not a memory. It was a creature, a being made of the crash itself, the Flicker Man. It lunged from the space where the windshield had been. It was not solid, but a storm of razor-sharp shrapnel and white-hot energy. It moved with impossible speed. Eva threw herself to the side, pulling Lena with her. Marcus was not fast enough. The Flicker Man slammed into him and he screamed, a raw, piercing sound of agony. The creature pulsed, a blast of heat and pressure filling the cockpit. Its form was incomprehensible, a constant, strobing nightmare of death. It wasn't just attacking them. It was the act of the crash happening over and over again in this single, concentrated spot. A piece of what looked like a turbine blade glowing red-hot spun out from the maelstrom and struck the main console. Sparks erupted. The creature recoiled from the electrical discharge, its form wavering. Eva scrambled to her feet. "Marcus!" He was on the floor, his arm twisted at a sickening angle, a deep gash in his side pouring blood onto the cockpit floor. He was alive, but barely. The Flicker Man solidified for a moment, its chaotic form resolving into something vaguely humanoid, a towering figure of wreckage and flame. It raised an arm made of tangled wires and steel beams and swung it toward them. Lena grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall. "Eva, help me." Eva seized Marcus, her muscles straining as she began to drag him toward the door. The cockpit was a death trap. They had listened to the voice of the thing that brought them here, and it had answered. Lena discharged the extinguisher. A cloud of white foam erupted, spraying across the entity. It let out a shriek that was a mix of a stall warning and a human scream, the sound grating on their very bones. The cold foam seemed to disrupt its energy, causing it to flicker more erratically. It bought them a few precious seconds. Eva hauled the moaning engineer out of the cockpit, his blood smearing a trail behind them. Lena followed, slamming the cockpit door shut just as a tremendous impact from inside buckled the metal. The door would not hold for long. They had to get out. They had to get back to the terminal. Chapter 5: Casualties. The retreat from the plane was a frantic, desperate scramble. Eva supported most of Marcus's weight, his groans of pain a grim rhythm accompanying their flight. Lena ran beside them, constantly looking back at the superjumbo, expecting the cockpit door to blast open at any second. The sun had touched the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of orange and blood red. The long shadows on the tarmac seemed to writhe and stretch, turning the empty spaces into a landscape of lurking threats. They reached the terminal doors. Kenji and a few other passengers, their faces white with anxiety, wrenched the barricade aside and helped them drag Marcus inside. "What happened? We heard screaming," Kenji demanded. "Something on the plane," Eva gasped out of breath. "It's not safe there. Nowhere is safe." They laid Marcus down on a row of connected chairs. Lena immediately went to work, her hands stained with his blood. She ripped open his shirt to assess the wound in his side. It was deep, jagged, and filled with a fine metallic dust. "I need the medical kit from the plane," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "And clean water. Now." The news of what happened spread through the concourse like a virus. There was a monster on the plane, a real, physical thing that had nearly killed them. The fragile sense of order Eva had tried to impose crumbled into open panic. Sarah Jenkins seized the moment. She stood on a baggage carousel, her arms outstretched. "You see, the plane is a vessel of sin, a cursed machine. We brought this upon ourselves by trusting in steel instead of the Lord. It is a demon, and it will hunt us until we repent." Her words resonated with the terrified survivors. A dozen people flocked to her side, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and fanaticism. The group was splitting, fracturing under the immense pressure. Lena, ignoring the chaos, focused on her patient. As she cleaned the wound on Marcus's side, she examined his other injuries. His arm was clearly broken, but she noticed something else. On the back of his neck, there was a strange, lattice-like pattern of burns, as if he had been pressed against a hot grill. It was a pattern she had never seen before. It looked almost like the weave of an upholstery seatbelt. A horrifying realization dawned on her. "Eva," she called out, her voice low, "come here." Eva knelt beside her. Lena pointed to the burn. "The flicker, man, it's not just random energy. It's made of the crash. When it hit him, he didn't just get cut. He was burned by a seatbelt that isn't here. He was hit by shrapnel from an explosion that didn't happen. The two realities aren't just connected, they're bleeding into each other. The crash is trying to finish the job." The full weight of their situation settled upon Eva. This wasn't just about survival. It was a war against a fundamental law of their new reality. The universe itself wanted them dead, and it was using the memory of their own violent end as the weapon. Her gaze swept over the survivors, the praying, the terrified, the injured. They were her crew, her passengers, her responsibility. Her failure in the crash reality was fueling the horror in this one. A cold resolve solidified in her chest. She had failed them once. She would not fail them again. She stood up, her posture straight, her voice cutting through the noise. "Everyone, listen to me." The authority in her tone, the ingrained command of a captain, silenced the room. Even Sarah Jenkins faltered, her sermon dying on her lips. "Panicking will get us killed," Eva stated, her eyes locking with people around the room. "Praying might give you comfort, but it won't barricade a door. We have one priority: staying alive. We will work together. We will find a defensible area in this terminal. We will scavenge for food, water, and medical supplies. We will post lookouts. We will survive. That is not a request. It is the only way." Her words, simple and direct, had an effect. It was a plan. It was structure in the face of chaos. It was hope, however faint. As if in answer to her declaration, the last light of the sun vanished below the horizon. The terminal's emergency lights, dim and sparse, flickered on, casting the vast space in a gloomy, uncertain glow. One of the passengers, a young woman near the large windows, let out a soft, terrified gasp. Eva turned. Everyone turned. Outside on the tarmac, bathed in the ghostly twilight, were the echoes. There were more of them now, dozens, a silent, growing crowd of their own dead selves standing perfectly still. An echo of Ben Carter stood near the wing of the plane, his head cocked at an unnatural angle. An echo of David Chen was there, his form pristine and whole, a cruel parody of his broken body. And among them dozens more, men, women, and children, a silent, spectral audience. They were all facing the terminal. They were all watching and waiting. Chapter 6: The Long Night. The arrival of the silent audience on the tarmac plunged the terminal into a new depth of fear. The sun was gone, and with it, the last illusion of safety. The emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows that made the concourse feel both vast and suffocating. Every survivor stared out the glass wall, transfixed by the sight of their own dead selves standing in the twilight. It was a macabre receiving line. "Barricade the doors," Eva said, her voice a low command that cut through the horrified stillness. "Now, use whatever you can find: luggage carts, benches, vending machines." Her order broke the spell. Kenji Tanaka, his face a grim mask, immediately started directing a group of able-bodied passengers. They worked with a desperate, frantic energy, a shared purpose that momentarily eclipsed their terror. They wrenched heavy metal benches from their bolts, tipped over drink machines with loud, echoing crashes, and piled luggage carts into a makeshift wall against the main glass entrances. The sounds of their labor were a fragile defiance against the suffocating silence outside. Lena Hansen remained with Marcus Cole, her focus absolute. "I need light," she snapped at a man cowering nearby. "A phone, a flashlight, anything." The man fumbled with his phone, its small LED casting a stark, clinical light on the gruesome wound in Marcus's side. He was conscious, his teeth gritted against the pain, his eyes darting fearfully toward the windows. "The data," he rasped, his voice weak. "The flight data recorder, it's still in there. It has the telemetry, the energy readings. Don't talk, Lena commanded, her fingers probing the edges of the wound. You have internal bleeding. I need to pack this, but I have nothing sterile. She looked around the terminal, her eyes falling on a closed duty-free shop. The sign read fine liquors. Alcohol, she muttered. It's a poor substitute, but it's better than nothing. While the main group fortified their position, Eva conducted a quick reconnaissance. She moved through the darkened corridors of the terminal, a heavy-duty flashlight from an airport emergency locker her only companion. The place was a modern labyrinth of gates, shops, and empty food courts. Every corner held a potential threat. Every long hallway felt like a shooting gallery. She found what she was looking for at Gate B12, a crew lounge and sleeping area set back from the main concourse. It had solid metal doors, no large windows, and its own small kitchen and bathroom facilities. It was defensible. She returned to the main group as they were finishing the barricade. "We're moving," she announced. "There's a crew lounge at the B gates. It's more secure than this glass box." The migration was a tense, hurried affair. They moved in a tight cluster with the injured Marcus on a makeshift stretcher of luggage straps and poles in the center. Eva led the way, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Sarah Jenkins and her followers brought up the rear, their prayers now a low, rhythmic chant, a ward against the encroaching darkness. As they passed a large digital departure board, it suddenly flickered to life. Not with flight information, but with a single, massive block of text. "Crash imminent. Brace for impact." The words glowed in a hellish red. A moment later, the terminal was plunged into absolute darkness. The emergency lights went out. A collective scream went up from the group, a wave of pure, primal fear. Then the flicker hit. It was different in the dark. Without visual cues, the other senses were overwhelmed. The piercing cold of the mountainside reality was shocking, a physical blow. The roar of the wind and the high-frequency shriek of tearing metal were deafening. The smell of burning fuel was so thick it felt like swallowing oil. People fell, disoriented, crying out in the disorienting chaos. Eva felt a searing pain shoot up her leg as if it were being crushed. It lasted only a few seconds, but it was devastating. When the gloom of the terminal returned, the emergency lights still dead, the group was scattered. The moans of the injured filled the air. "Sound off," Eva yelled, her voice hoarse. She shone her flashlight beam around, revealing a scene of utter confusion. People were helping each other up, their faces pale in the narrow beam. "My arm," a man cried out. "I think it's broken." Lena's voice cut through the darkness from nearby. "Here, I need light over here." Eva rushed toward the sound. Lena was kneeling over a woman who was lying motionless on the floor. It was Chloe, one of the honeymooners. Her husband, Liam, was beside her, his face a mess of tears and disbelief. "She's not breathing," Lena said, her voice flat with shock. She began chest compressions, her movements practiced and desperate. "There's no wound, no visible injury. It's like her heart just stopped." Liam sobbed. In the crash she had, her chest was crushed. He choked on the words. "I saw her. She was right next to me." Lena didn't stop compressions, but a look of grim understanding passed between her and Eva. Chloe hadn't been physically injured in the flicker. The memory of her death in the other reality had become real enough to stop her heart. The crash was getting more efficient at finishing its job. Suddenly, a new sound echoed through the hall, a rhythmic, metallic scraping. It was coming from the direction of the barricade. Scrape, drag, drag. Eva spun around, her flashlight beam cutting across the concourse toward the main entrance. The barricade was intact. The sound was coming from inside the terminal. It was a wreckage dragger. It had phased through the floor near the entrance, a grotesque creature born from the crash. It was a tangled mass of fuselage, seats, and wiring, all fused together with what looked like melted plastic and organic matter. Severed limbs, pale and bloodless, were embedded in its form, twitching spastically. It was dragging itself forward on two broken landing gear struts, the metal shrieking against the polished floor. It had no eyes, no face, but it was moving directly toward the scent of the living, toward them. Chapter 7. The B-Gate Bastion. Move now. Eva's shout galvanized the stunned survivors. The sight of the wreckage dragger, a monster torn from the fabric of their worst nightmare, was a more potent motivator than any command. Liam, his face a mask of grief, refused to leave Chloe's body. "I'm not leaving her," he screamed as two men tried to pull him away. "She's gone, son," one of the men said gently but firmly. "You'll be gone too if you stay here." He finally managed to haul the sobbing man to his feet. The group fled, a panicked stampede through the darkened corridors. The rhythmic, agonizing scrape of the wreckage dragger pursued them, a sound that promised a slow, grinding death. Eva led the way, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly, her mind racing. They were exposed, vulnerable. They reached the crew lounge at gate B12. It was a heavy steel door with a small, reinforced window. Kenji, demonstrating a surprising presence of mind, fumbled with the electronic keypad. It was dead. "Manual override," he grunted, pulling a small panel off the wall and yanking a lever. The lock clicked open. They poured into the lounge, a chaotic flood of terrified people. The space was small, comprised of a main seating area, a kitchenette, and two small, windowless sleeping pods. It was cramped for so many, but the solid walls felt like a sanctuary. "The door," Eva yelled. Several men threw their weight against the heavy steel door, swinging it shut. They engaged the manual deadbolt, a thick bar of steel that slid into place with a reassuring thud. The scraping outside grew louder, closer. It reached the door and stopped. Silence. Then a tremendous bang shook the entire frame. The creature was trying to batter its way through. Bang, bang, bang. Each impact was a physical blow, vibrating through the floor, rattling their bones. People screamed, huddling together in the center of the room, as far from the door as possible. Sarah Jenkins led her followers in a frantic prayer, their voices rising in a desperate crescendo with each impact. Lena had found a first aid station in the lounge. She worked on Marcus under the beam of a dozen phone flashlights, her face a grim canvas of concentration. The banging made her work nearly impossible, her hands shaking with each blow. "It's no good," she said through clenched teeth. "The bleeding is internal. I can't stop it without surgery. He's going into shock." Marcus's eyes fluttered open. He looked at Eva, his gaze surprisingly lucid. "The FDR," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the din. "The other recorder, it has the flight data, not just audio energy signatures position. It can tell us what the anomaly was, not just that it was." "We can't go back there, Marcus," Eva said softly. A weak, bloody smile touched his lips. "Have to, it's the only way to understand the rules," his eyes unfocused, and his head lolled to the side. Lena checked his pulse. She looked up, her expression defeated. "He's gone." The news of a third death rippled through the room, another blow to their fragile morale. The relentless, thunderous assault on the door continued, a promise that their sanctuary was temporary. The impacts were changing. They were no longer just brute force. A horrific grinding sound joined the banging, the shriek of metal on metal. "It's trying to tear through the lock," a man near the door stammered, his eyes wide with terror. Eva shone her flashlight on the thick steel deadbolt. Fine metal dust was falling from the slit where it met the frame. The creature was methodically, patiently, grinding its way through solid steel. They had minutes, maybe an hour, before it breached their defense. The small O'Connell boy who had been sitting silently in a corner suddenly spoke. "It's not just one," he said, his voice small and clear. Everyone turned to him. "There are more coming. I can hear them." No one else could hear anything but the creature at the door. "What do you hear, son?" Eva asked gently, kneeling in front of him. "The floor," the boy whispered, pointing down. "They're coming up through the floor." As he spoke, a section of industrial carpet in the corner of the room began to bulge upward. The tile underneath cracked with a sharp retort. A dark, oily liquid, smelling of jet fuel, began to seep through the cracks. It was the same substance that had formed the baggage claim creature. An oil-slick predator was phasing into existence right inside their sanctuary. The wreckage dragger at the door was a distraction. They were being besieged from all sides, and their fortress had just become a tomb. Chapter 8: The Engineer's Gambit. Panic erupted. The sight of the floor buckling and the black ooze seeping through was the breaking point. The survivors scrambled away from the corner, trampling each other in a mad rush to get to the opposite side of the room. Their sanctuary was compromised. The monster at the door was no longer the primary threat. "Everyone back!" Eva yelled, trying to impose order on the chaos. She shoved people toward the kitchenette, a slightly more defensible corner of the lounge. The bulge on the floor grew, the tiles shattering as a dark, amorphous shape began to rise. It had no definite form, a shimmering, non-Newtonian mass of iridescent black fluid. It was an oil-slick predator, larger and more menacing than the puddles they had seen before. It pulsed, and a low, gurgling sound emanated from it, the sound of a drowning man's last breath. Sarah Jenkins shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. The pit of hell opens for us." The creature began to spread across the floor, a slow, inexorable tide of blackness. A fallen backpack was enveloped by it, dissolving into the ooze with a faint, sizzling sound. This thing didn't just smother, it consumed. Eva's mind raced, searching for a weapon, a strategy. Fire. The fuel smell was a clue. "Lena, the alcohol from the shop," she shouted. Lena, who had been trying to organize a terrified huddle of passengers, understood instantly. She grabbed the 2 bottles of high-proof whiskey she had taken. "What's the plan?" "We need a fuse. Anyone have a handkerchief, a piece of cloth?" Kenji Tanaka, his uniform torn and grimy, ripped a long strip from his shirt sleeve without hesitation. He stuffed it into one of the bottles. "Captain," he asked, his hand shaking as he held out the makeshift Molotov cocktail. "Not yet," Eva said, her eyes fixed on the spreading pool of blackness. It was moving toward the pile of bodies they had laid in the corner. "Chloe, Marcus. It was drawn to death. We need to draw it away from the exit. We need a way out." The grinding at the main door was getting louder, more frantic. The deadbolt was groaning under the strain. They were trapped between 2 advancing horrors. A man, one of David Chen's cynical acolytes from before, made a run for it. "I'm not dying in here," he screamed, sprinting toward the door to the main concourse. "No, wait," Eva yelled. He was too fast. He wrenched at the deadbolt. The grinding from outside stopped instantly. The man fumbled with the lock, a wild look in his eyes. He managed to slide it open a few inches. A thick metallic claw, part of a landing gear strut, punched through the gap, impaling the man through the chest. It lifted him off his feet, his scream cut short in a wet gurgle. The wreckage dragger outside roared, a triumphant sound of grinding gears and static, and wrenched the body through the gap, pulling it out into the hall. The door slammed shut again, but the lock was broken. The oil-slick predator inside the room changed its course. It stopped moving toward the bodies and began to flow toward the main door, drawn by the fresh kill. It was their only chance. "Now," Eva shouted to Kenji, "light it." Kenji flicked a lighter, his hand trembling so badly it took him 3 tries. The cloth fuse caught fire. He hurled the bottle. It shattered against the far wall, splashing whiskey across the floor and the advancing edge of the black ooze. The flames erupted, a wall of bright orange fire. The oil-slick predator recoiled, letting out a horrific, sizzling shriek as the flames touched it. The black liquid ignited, burning with a thick, acrid smoke that filled the room. The creature writhed in the fire, its form contracting, but it wasn't being destroyed. It was being contained. "The sleeping pods," Eva yelled, pointing to the 2 small, closet-sized rooms at the back of the lounge. "They have vents to the maintenance tunnels. It's our only way out." The survivors surged toward the 2 small doors. It was a bottleneck. People pushed and shoved, their faces contorted with fear. The fire in the room was spreading, feeding on the flammable carpet and furniture. Smoke was filling the air, thick and choking. The wreckage dragger at the main door, enraged, began to slam against it again, the damaged frame starting to buckle. Eva was near the back of the line, pushing people through the narrow opening into the first sleeping pod. She saw the second pod was already full, the last person scrambling through a ceiling vent. She turned back. Lena was still there, trying to help a woman who had fallen and twisted her ankle. "Go," Lena yelled, coughing from the smoke. "I've got her." Eva looked from Lena to the fire, then to the main door, which was now visibly bending inward. She thought of Marcus's last words. The FDR, it's the only way to understand the rules. He was right. Fighting these things one by one was a losing battle. They were symptoms. They needed to find the disease. It was a crazy, suicidal idea, but it was the only one that felt like a solution, not just a delay of the inevitable. "Lena, get them out," Eva yelled, her voice raw from the smoke. She turned away from the escape route and ran back into the burning lounge. She grabbed the other bottle of whiskey and a spare fire extinguisher from the wall. She could hear Lena screaming her name, but she didn't look back. She sprinted toward the main door. The wreckage dragger was about to break through. She had to get back to the plane. It was a desperate, insane gambit, but it was the only one they had. She would trade her life for a chance, for an answer. She braced herself, ready to face the monster head-on. Chapter 9: The Second Descent. The steel door buckled inward with a final, deafening groan and was torn from its hinges. The wreckage dragger filled the doorway, a colossal, twitching sculpture of death. It was bigger up close, a tangle of torn seats, shredded wiring and jagged fuselage. A broken navigation light pulsed deep within its core, casting a sickly green glow on the smoke-filled room. It paused for a moment, its fused form quivering as it processed the scene. The fire, the smoke, the lone human figure standing before it. Eva didn't hesitate. She hurled the second Molotov cocktail. It exploded against the creature's center mass, showering it in burning whiskey. The monster shrieked, a sound of scraping metal and overloaded speakers, and flailed wildly. The flames licked across its oily, fuel-soaked surfaces, causing small, secondary explosions as pockets of vapor ignited. It was her chance. Eva ducked low and sprinted past the writhing, burning behemoth, out into the darkened corridor. She didn't look back. The sounds of the creature smashing blindly against the walls of the lounge pursued her. The main concourse was an apocalyptic vision. The air was thick with a strange, shimmering haze, the lingering energy of the last flicker. The bodies of the dead from that event were gone, but their outlines were faintly etched onto the floor and walls as dark, scorched silhouettes like grim photonegatives. And outside, the crowd of silent echoes had grown. Hundreds of them now stood on the tarmac, their dead eyes all fixed on the terminal, on her. Eva ignored them. She ran, her lungs burning, her mind focused on a single objective, the flight data recorder. She raced toward the main entrance, toward the darkened superjumbo waiting on the tarmac. As she neared the glass wall, the world stuttered. Another flicker was coming. She braced herself. The terminal dissolved. She was on the mountainside, cold, wind, the smell of death. But this time she didn't close her eyes. She forced herself to look. She was standing near the cockpit section of the wreckage. It was a mangled ruin, but she could see inside. She saw her own dead body just as before. But she also saw the flight data recorder, its orange casing shockingly bright against the char and ruin. It was wedged under the co-pilot's seat, intact. She saw Ben Carter's corpse, his hand outstretched as if he'd been reaching for it. Then she saw something else. On the slope below the cockpit, something was moving. It wasn't a monster, it was a person, a figure silhouetted against the burning wreckage. They were methodically searching the debris. It was the unseen passenger, the person from seat 34B that no one could remember. Before Eva could get a clear look at their face, the flicker ended. She was back in the terminal, gasping for air, the phantom cold still clinging to her skin. The unseen passenger. They were real. They had survived the crash in that reality. Were they the cause of this? A survivor of one reality haunting the other. There was no time to process it. She burst through a set of glass doors and onto the tarmac. The air was still and cold. The silent army of echoes turned their heads in unison to follow her movement. It was like running through a field of statues that were all alive. Their dead eyes promised a fate she was desperately trying to avoid. She reached the jet bridge and scrambled up the stairs. The interior of the plane was cold and dark. The smell of discharged fire extinguisher and burned wiring from the cockpit was overpowering. She armed herself with the extinguisher she had carried from the lounge, its weight a small comfort. She pushed open the cockpit door. The flickerman was gone. The room was a wreck. The console was shattered where the turbine blade had struck it. The seats were torn, but otherwise it was empty. She moved cautiously to the floor panel Marcus had opened. She reached in, her fingers searching for the second orange box. She found it, wedged deep inside the avionics bay. As her fingers closed around it, the plane's communication system crackled to life. A single, clear voice filled the cockpit. It wasn't radio chatter. It was a calm, almost gentle female voice, speaking with eerie precision. Quantum state degradation at 73%, the voice announced. Superpositional collapse is imminent. Please return to your assigned reality. Eva froze, her hand clamped around the FDR. The voice wasn't from a pilot or air traffic control. It was the voice of the plane itself. A calm, automated message from the ghost in the machine. Warning, the voice continued, its tone never changing. Cross-continuum presence detected. Unscheduled biosignatures must be purged to ensure dimensional integrity. Commencing system-wide reboot. The dead instrument panels all flashed on at once, glowing with a brilliant blue light. The hum of the engines, which had been a constant background noise, began to rise in pitch, climbing toward a deafening whine. The entire aircraft began to vibrate, not violently like before, but with a deep, powerful thrumming, like a colossal machine waking up. Eva knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that this reboot was not meant to save them. It was meant to sterilize the system, to erase the glitch, to erase her. The plane was going to recreate the anomaly, and she was at ground zero. She scrambled out of the cockpit, the FDR clutched to her chest, and ran for the exit. The plane was no longer a refuge or a source of answers. It was the weapon, and it was rearming itself. Chapter 10: The Theory of Souls. Eva sprinted down the jet bridge, the high-pitched whine of the plane's engines escalating behind her into a physical pressure. The air grew thick, electric. The very atoms around her seemed to vibrate in sympathy with the dying machine. The army of echoes on the tarmac remained motionless, but their heads tracked her, a unified, silent judgment. She burst back into the terminal, gasping for breath, the precious flight data recorder held tight against her chest. She didn't dare look back. The light emanating from the plane was intensifying, shifting from blue to the searing, violent violet of the anomaly. She found the maintenance access panel the survivors had escaped through. It was a small, unassuming metal plate in the wall of one of the sleeping pods, now hanging open. Without a second's hesitation, she plunged into the darkness beyond. The tunnel was narrow and square, filled with thick bundles of wiring and pipes. It was pitch black and smelled of dust and stale, recycled air. She could hear the faint, distant sounds of her fellow survivors, their panicked voices echoing from deep within the labyrinthine network. She used her flashlight to navigate, following the scuff marks and footprints they had left behind. The whine of the plane reached an unbearable crescendo, and then it was cut off by a sound that was not a sound. It was a physical impact of pure silence, a wave of negative pressure that traveled through the solid earth. The concrete tunnel around her groaned. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The flicker that followed was the most violent yet. For a full 10 seconds, the cramped, dark tunnel was replaced by the open, screaming chaos of the mountainside. She felt the ground beneath her vanish, a sickening lurch of falling, before the solid concrete returned, slamming her back into a harsh reality. She lay there for a moment, her body aching, her ears ringing. The plane had done something, a reboot, a purge. When she finally staggered to her feet and continued down the tunnel, she sensed a change. The air felt different, lighter. The oppressive, ever-present dread had lessened just slightly. She finally caught up with the others. They had found a larger junction room, a hub for the terminal's power and water systems. They were a sorry sight. Soot-stained, terrified, their numbers visibly diminished. Lena was tending to the injured, her face a stony mask of exhaustion. Kenji was trying to keep a head count. Liam, the honeymooner, sat against a wall, rocking back and forth, his eyes vacant. The O'Connell family huddled together, the parents trying to shield their children from the grim reality of their new world. Sarah Jenkins and her followers were in a corner, their prayers more subdued now, tinged with a weary fatalism. Eva, Lena's voice was a mixture of relief and astonishment. "We thought you were. My God, what happened out there?" "The plane rebooted," Eva said, holding up the orange box. "I got it, the FDR." Before anyone could react, the little O'Connell boy spoke up again, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "They're quiet now," he said, looking at Eva with wide, solemn eyes. "Who's quiet, sweetie?" his mother asked, stroking his hair. "The echoes," he replied simply. "Outside, they stopped watching." Eva and a few others crept back down the tunnel to a service grate that offered a view of the tarmac. The boy was right. The hundreds of echoes were still there, but they were different. They were no longer facing the terminal. They stood aimlessly, some slumped over, others facing the empty runways. Their heads were no longer tracking movement. The life, the malevolent intent had gone out of them. They were just statues now. Husks. "The reboot," Eva whispered. "It severed the connection or weakened it." They returned to the junction room. A flicker of hope ignited amongst the group. Eva found a quiet corner and set to work. She didn't have Marcus's diagnostic tools, but the FDR was designed with multiple access points. Using a multi-tool from her flight bag, she managed to pry open a service port, revealing a small, ruggedized data screen and a simple interface. The screen flickered to life. It was a stream of raw telemetry: altitude, airspeed, g-forces, engine output. She scrolled through pages of data, her pilot's training allowing her to make sense of the chaos. She found the moment of the anomaly. The numbers went wild: impossible g-forces, negative airspeed, altitude readings that fluctuated by millions of feet in milliseconds. Then she found a new data stream, one she had never seen on any recorder before. It was labeled Quantum State Index (QSI) and Biosignature Count (BSC). Before the anomaly, the QSI was a steady one. The BSC was 488, the exact number of passengers and crew. At the moment of the anomaly, the QSI value became undefined, an error symbol flashing on the screen. The BSC, however, did something chilling. It doubled. For a fraction of a second, the plane's systems registered 976 souls on board. Then the numbers split. Two distinct data sets were created, labeled Manifold A and Manifold B. In Manifold A, the QSI stabilized at 1, but the BSC dropped to 0. This was followed by flight data consistent with a catastrophic impact: total system failure, massive deceleration, explosion. This was the crash reality. In Manifold B, the QSI was a fluctuating, unstable value, hovering around 0.73. The BSC was 488. This was their reality. The flight data showed the plane continuing to fly, eventually landing at the empty airport. Eva stared at the screen, the horrifying truth assembling itself in her mind. "It wasn't a teleportation," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Lena and Kenji crowded around her. "It was a duplication, a Xerox of a soul." She explained what she was seeing. The anomaly, whatever it was, hit our plane and created a perfect quantum duplicate of everything inside it at that exact moment. Two planes, two sets of passengers, two realities occupying the same space but vibrating on a different frequency. "So the crash, it really happened?" Kenji asked, his face ashen. "It happened to our duplicates," Eva clarified. "Manifold A, their plane crashed and they all died. Our plane, Manifold B, flew on. We are the echo, the copy." A horrified silence fell over the small group. They were not the survivors of a freak accident. They were the accident itself. Ghosts in a machine that had never been meant to exist. "The monsters," Lena breathed. "The echoes, the flicker man, what are they?" "They're the system trying to correct the error," Eva said, her eyes fixed on the unstable QSI value. "This reality, Manifold B, is unstable. It's a paradox. It's decaying. The crash reality, Manifold A, is the stable one because it's resolved. Death is a resolution. The flickers, the monsters, they are the crash reality bleeding through, trying to impose its stability on us, trying to make us match our dead selves, to resolve the paradox." "The reboot," Kenji said. "It cut the connection." "It weakened it," Eva corrected. "The QSI value is still unstable. This reality is still decaying. But the direct link is frayed, for now." She scrolled further through the data, her blood running cold at what she found next. A sublog from the reboot event. It contained a single entry: "System error. Unscheduled biosignature remains in manifold A subject designation. 34B paradox resolution incomplete. Resuming corrective action in 24 hours. Eva looked up at the faces around her. "The unseen passenger," she said. "The one I saw at the crash site. They survived the crash in the other reality. They aren't supposed to exist. And because they are there, the system can't fully resolve. It thinks there's still an error to correct." A chilling realization dawned on her. The system isn't just trying to kill us, it's trying to kill them. We're just the collateral damage, and it's going to start again in 24 hours. Chapter 11. The Unseen Passenger. The revelation from the flight data recorder settled over the survivors like a shroud. They were copies, echoes in a decaying reality, and their brief reprieve was on a 24-hour clock. The knowledge was a heavier burden than the monsters, the creatures they could fight. But how do you fight a law of physics? How do you fight the universe's need to delete a fatal error? Despair was a tangible thing in the junction room. Sarah Jenkins's prayers became fatalistic whispers of the end times. Liam, the widower, stared at the wall, lost to a world of grief. The fragile alliances Eva had forged began to fray as the ultimate deadline loomed. Eva, however, felt a strange clarity. The problem was no longer an amorphous terror. It had a name, a location, and a variable. Subject 34 be the unseen passenger. The passenger in the other reality, they're the linchpin, she explained to Lena and Kenji, her voice low and intense. Their existence is the reason the paradox is resolved. The system is trying to erase them. If it succeeds, the stable reality, the crash, is cemented. I don't know what that means for us, but it sounds like game over. But if we can get to them first. Get to them? Kenji asked, incredulous. Eva, they are in another reality, one where we are all dead. The flickers, Eva said, her mind racing. They're not random. They're incursions from manifold A into our world. But what if it can go the other way? The FDR said cross-continuum presence detected. The system knows things can cross over. If we can trigger a flicker, a controlled one, maybe we can cross over intentionally. And do what? Lena challenged, her pragmatism warring with the sheer insanity of the idea. Say hello, we'd be walking into our own gravesite. The place is a death trap. We bring them here, Eva stated, the plan solidifying in her mind. We find subject 34B and bring them into manifold B if a living person from the real world crosses into the copy world. What does that do to the paradox? It might destabilize the whole system. It might break the rules. It's a chance. It's the only chance. The idea was beyond reckless. It was a leap of faith into a conceptual abyss. But it was also the first glimmer of a proactive strategy. The group debated it fiercely. Sarah Jenkins denounced it as a pact with demons, an attempt to meddle with God's judgment. Others were too terrified to even consider it, but Lena, despite her skepticism, saw the desperate logic. Kenji, loyal to his captain, pledged his help. A handful of other survivors, clinging to any hope, agreed to help. The first problem was how to trigger a flicker. The last one was caused by the plane's reboot. Before that, by David touching an echo. And the one in the cockpit by the voice recorder. It's about energy, Eva deduced, studying the FDR, concentrated energy that mimics the signature of the anomaly. The voice on the recorder, the psychic energy of the echoes, the massive discharge from the plane's engines, they all agitate the boundary between realities. Their plan formed around a massive electrical substation they had discovered deeper in the maintenance tunnels. It was their best bet for generating a massive power surge. They would need to reroute the main circuit breakers and overload the system, creating a contained electrical explosion. It was incredibly dangerous. It could kill them all, or it could be their gateway. While a small team worked on the substation, Eva had another mission. She needed to know who Subject 34B was. She powered up the FDR again, navigating to the passenger manifest. She scrolled down the list of names, her finger tracing the seat numbers. 34A, Cole Marcus. 34C, O'Connell Michael. Seat 34B was listed, but the name field was blank. An error. No, the data was pristine. She cross-referenced it with the ticketing information. Seat 34B was booked on a corporate account, a last-minute addition. The name associated with the booking was Dr. Aris Thorne, a theoretical physicist. But Thorne had canceled his ticket 3 hours before the flight. The system showed the seat as officially empty. Yet the biosignature count was 488, not 487. And the system had logged a presence for 34B. Someone was on that flight who wasn't on the manifest. A stowaway. An airline employee. She thought back to the flicker on the tarmac, the glimpse she'd had of the figure on the mountainside. It was a fleeting image, but she remembered a detail. A flash of color. The figure was wearing a flight attendant's uniform. Her blood ran cold. She pulled up the crew manifest. All flight attendants were accounted for, except one. A junior attendant named Maya. No, that wasn't right. Her own daughter's name. She shook her head, forcing herself to focus. The name was Ilara Vance. She had called in sick that morning. Her replacement was assigned at the last minute. Eva scrolled to the bottom of the crew list. There it was, the replacement's name. A name that hadn't been on the initial roster she had reviewed before takeoff. A name she didn't know. A quiet, unassuming woman Eva vaguely remembered seeing during boarding. A face in the background. Flight attendant, junior grade, Ilara Vance. It was a trick of the system. Ilara wasn't a passenger. She was crew. Her biosignature was logged, but her last-minute assignment meant her name wasn't properly synced with the passenger-facing seat manifest for 34B, the jump seat she must have been occupying. She was the ghost in the machine, the rounding error in the cosmic equation. Ilara Vance was the unseen passenger. Chapter 12, Crossing Over. 23 hours had passed. The survivors worked with a feverish intensity born of desperation. In the bowels of the terminal, at the main power substation, Eva's small team made their final preparations. They had stripped massive copper cables from the walls and rerouted them, creating a dangerous, jury-rigged bypass that would short-circuit the entire grid. This is going to release a massive electromagnetic pulse, one of the volunteers, a former electrician, warned. When we throw this switch, everything in a 100-yard radius is going to fry, and that includes us if we're too close. They designated a safe zone down a connecting tunnel. The plan was simple and suicidal. Eva would throw the main breaker. The resulting surge would, they hoped, tear a stable rift between the two realities at the point of highest energy concentration, the substation itself. She would have to cross through the instant it opened. Lena and Kenji would follow, their job to find Alara Vance and convince her to come back with them. "She's a flight attendant," Eva reminded them, her voice tight. "She's trained to follow a captain's orders. Find her. Tell her Captain Molnar is alive and needs her. It's our only chance." The rest of the survivors were barricaded far away, in a concrete bunker of a cargo bay, with enough food and water for a day. It was the best Eva could do for them. She looked at the faces of her small team: Lena, her jaw set with grim determination; Kenji, his fear masked by a profound sense of duty. They were all that was left of the crew of Flight 815. "Ready?" Eva asked. They nodded. There was nothing left to say. Eva stood before the massive, archaic breaker switch. It was a heavy, rusted lever that required two hands to move. She took a deep breath, the smell of ozone thick in the air. "See you on the other side," she said, and pulled the lever down. The world did not flicker, it shattered. The sound was absolute, a physical wall of thunder that deafened them. The air ignited, a brilliant white arc of electricity flashing between the terminals, turning the substation into a miniature sun. The EMP wave hit them like a physical blow, and the world dissolved into a screaming vortex of energy and light. Eva felt herself being torn apart and reassembled. She wasn't on the mountainside this time. She was in the crash. She experienced a single, eternal second of explosive decompression, of being thrown against a wall, of searing heat and freezing cold. Then her feet hit solid ground. The air was frigid, smelling of pine, smoke, and death. She was standing on the steep, debris-strewn slope of a mountain under a sky of bruised purple twilight. Above her, the stars were cold and brilliant. She was in Manifold-day, the real world. The wreckage of Flight 815 was everywhere, a vast, silent graveyard of metal and memory. A section of the tail fin stood upright, a tombstone against the sky. Seats with their occupants still strapped in were scattered like discarded toys. The silence here was different from the silence of the empty terminal. This was the profound, respectful silence of a place where a great tragedy had occurred. Lena and Kenji stumbled into existence beside her, their faces pale with shock and nausea. The rift had worked. They had crossed over. "Where is she?" Lena asked, her voice a ragged whisper. Eva scanned the wreckage. "The cockpit," she said, pointing up the slope. The mangled forward section of the plane was wedged between two massive rock formations. "That's where I saw her last." They began to climb, their feet slipping on the loose scree and twisted metal. It was a landscape from hell. As they moved, Eva couldn't help but look. She saw the body of the man from 12D. She saw the O'Connell family, huddled together even in death. She saw her own echoes from the other world, but here they were just bodies, their stillness mundane and terrible. She forced herself to look away, focusing on her mission. They found her near the cockpit, Alara Vance. She was alive. She had a makeshift splint on her leg and a deep gash on her forehead, but she was alive. She had built a small, pathetic shelter from fuselage panels and was huddled over a tiny fire, her flight attendant's jacket wrapped tightly around her. She looked up as they approached, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief. Who are you?" she stammered, scrambling for a piece of sharpened metal she was using as a knife. "Ilara," Eva said, holding up her hands to show she meant no harm. "I'm Captain Eva Molnar. This is Lena Hansen, a doctor, and Kenji Tanaka. We were on the flight." Ilara's face contorted with confusion and grief. "No, you can't be. Everyone is dead. I'm the only one. I've been here for weeks." "Weeks, time flowed differently here." "We know it's impossible," Lena said gently. "But we're real. We came from somewhere else. A copy of our world. Ilara, we need you to come with us." "Come with you where?" she cried, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. "Back into the nightmare. Things come in the dark, shapes. Things made of broken metal and screaming. I hide from them every night. The Flicker Man, the Wreckage Draggers. They existed here too. Not as incursions, but as native inhabitants. The tormented psychic residue of the crash." "We can get you out of here," Eva insisted. "But we have to go now. The gateway won't stay open forever." A deep, grinding sound echoed from the wreckage below them. A wreckage dragger, drawn by their voices, was beginning to stir. Ilara stared at them, at their clean clothes, their faces unmarred by weeks of survival. She saw the truth in their impossible existence. Hope warred with terror in her eyes. "What are you?" she whispered. "Are you angels?" "We're the crew," Kenji said, his voice finding a strength she had not known he possessed. "And we don't leave anyone behind." He extended a hand. The grinding from below grew louder. After a moment of hesitation that felt like an eternity, Ilara Vance took it. They helped her to her feet and began their frantic descent back to the substation, back to the shimmering tier in reality that was their only way home. Chapter 13: The Collapse. The journey back to the rift was a desperate, panicked flight. Ilara, weak and injured, slowed them down, but they supported her between them, half carrying, half dragging her over the treacherous terrain. Behind them, the grinding of the wreckage dragger grew louder, joined now by a high-pitched, strobing shriek. The Flicker Man was active, hunting them in its native reality. They reached the ruin of the substation. It was no longer a place of concrete and wire, but a raw, gaping wound in the world. A shimmering, vertical oval of distorted light hung in the air, the edges crackling with violet energy. It was unstable, pulsing erratically. Their gateway was closing. "We're not going to make it," Kenji yelled over the rising wind. A blast of heat and pressure washed over them as the Flicker Man phased into existence on the slope above. A 20-foot-tall vortex of screaming metal and incandescent rage. It was more powerful here, more solid. It was home. "Go," Eva screamed, shoving the others toward the rift. "Get her through." Lena and Kenji pushed Ilara toward the shimmering portal. Eva turned to face the monster, armed with nothing but a metal pipe she'd picked up from the debris. It was a suicidal, symbolic gesture, the captain going down with the ship. But as the Flicker Man lunged, something unexpected happened. Alara Vance, standing at the edge of the two realities, screamed. It was not a scream of fear, but of pure, undiluted grief for the world she was leaving, for the people who had died. The rift pulsed violently in response to her emotional outcry. The energy arced outward, striking the Flicker Man. The creature convulsed, its form dissolving into static. It was vulnerable to the energy of the rift itself. The paradox, Eva realized. She's the anchor to this reality. Bringing her through is tearing it apart. Lena and Kenji pulled the screaming, weeping flight attendant through the portal. The moment Alara Vance, Subject 34B of Manifold A, crossed the threshold into Manifold B, the universe broke. Eva threw herself through the rift a second after them. She landed on the hard concrete of the substation in her own reality, just as the portal collapsed behind her with a sound like shattering glass. The change was instantaneous and total. The very air of the terminal seemed to hum, charged with an impossible energy. A deep, seismic tremor shook the entire airport, not from the ground but from the fabric of reality itself. The lights, both real and emergency, flickered on, shining with an unnatural brightness. Outside the terminal, the silent, inert army of echoes all vanished at once, like a candle flame blown out in the wind. "What's happening?" Lena yelled, helping Alara to her feet. "We broke it," Eva said, a wild, terrified grin on her face. "We introduced a variable the system can't compute. A living person from the real world is now in the copy world. It's a total paradox." On the far wall of the substation, words began to form, burned into the concrete by an invisible heat. It wasn't a system message. It was something else. System error, paradoxical biosignature DETECTED, reality manifold integrity COMPROMISCD, initiating. The word changed, cycling through a dozen languages and symbols before settling on one Eva could read. A deletion. The seismic tremor intensified. Cracks began to race across the floor, not cracks in the concrete, but jagged black fissures that seemed to lead into nothingness. Pieces of the ceiling began to flake away, not falling but simply ceasing to exist, erased from the world. The decay, which had been a slow rot, was now a galloping, ravenous plague. Their reality was being unwritten, deleted by the master program. "We didn't fix it," Kenji whispered in horror. "We made it worse. We sped it up." They had not saved their world. They had signed its death warrant. Their entire reality, the copy of Earth created in the anomaly, was collapsing in on itself. They had traded a slow death for a quick and total annihilation. The four of them stood in the heart of the dying airport, watching as their world was erased around them, the black fissures of non-existence racing to consume them. Chapter 14, 489. The end was not a bang but a peeling away of layers. The concrete floor vanished beneath their feet, replaced by a swirling gray nothingness. The walls dissolved into mist. The air thinned, becoming hard to breathe. They were in the raw code of reality, the blank space between the pages of existence. Eva grabbed the hands of the others, forming a small, defiant circle in the heart of the uncreation. Ilara was sobbing. Lena was staring into the void with a scientist's horrified awe, and Kenji was chanting a quiet Buddhist prayer. This was it, the final error message. But the deletion stopped. The black fissures halted their advance a few feet from them. The gray void around them stabilized. In the nothingness, a single point of light appeared. It drifted toward them, resolving into a familiar shape. The orange casing of the flight data recorder. It hovered in the air before them, its small data screen glowing. A new message appeared on it, written in the same simple, automated text. New variable DETECTED. Manifold B is unstable. Manifold A is unstable. Neither reality can be resolved. Query create new directive. YN. Eva stared at the box. It was communicating with them, or with something that was communicating through it. The base code of the system, the architect of their prison, was asking them what to do. The paradox they created had broken its logic. It had no protocol for this scenario. It's asking us, Lena breathed. The system is asking us for instructions. What do we tell it? Kenji asked, his voice trembling. Tell it to send us home, Ilara wept. Back to the real world. We can't, Eva said, her mind piecing together the final, terrible logic. Manifold A, the real world, is just as broken as this one now. We took its last survivor. It's a ghost world, haunted by the memory of us. And we are ghosts, haunting a world that is deleting itself. There is no home to go back to. They were caught between two collapsing realities, trapped in the space between. So what do we do? Lena asked. What is the new directive? Eva looked at the faces around her. She thought of the passengers they had lost. Marcus, David, Chloe. She thought of the ones huddled in the cargo bay, waiting for a rescue that would never come. She thought of her daughter, Maya, in a world that was now just a haunted memory. There was no victory here, no winning. There was only a choice between two kinds of oblivion. Why, she said, her voice clear and steady in the void. She reached out and touched the yes prompt on the screen. The screen went blank for a second, then a new line of text appeared. Directive required. Specify parameters for new manifold. Specify parameters. It was asking them to write the rules of their new world, to define the terms of their existence. Merge them, Eva said, speaking the words aloud as if the machine could hear her. She began to type on the small interface, her fingers moving with purpose. Merge the realities, don't delete, integrate. Merge protocol requires sacrifice. An energy equivalent is needed to stabilize dual paradox. Specify source. An energy equivalent, a sacrifice. It was a law of cosmic physics. To create, something must be given. Eva knew what it was asking for. She looked at Lena, Kenji, and Ilara. They were the bridge between the worlds. Their unique state, their impossible existence, was the energy source. Thus, she typed. She didn't have to explain. They all understood. To create a stable world, the paradoxes, the living copies and the impossible survivor, had to be consumed by the system. Their lives for the lives of the others. Kenji closed his eyes and nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. Lena took a deep, shuddering breath and met Eva's gaze, her expression one of profound, sorrowful acceptance. Ilara, the girl who had survived the unsurvivable, finally stopped crying. She looked at Eva and offered a small, watery smile. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not leaving me on that mountain." Eva finished typing the command. Source: the bridge crew. Eva Molnar. Lena Hanson. Kenjitanaaka. Elavance. She hit enter. The light from the FDR expanded, a warm, golden radiance that enveloped them. There was no pain, just a feeling of dissolving, a gentle unmaking. Eva's last thought was of her daughter, Maya. Not the photo from the cockpit, but a memory of her laughing in the sun, her face full of life. It was a good memory to end on. The light consumed them, and then it consumed everything. Chapter 15: The Arrival. The passengers huddled in the dark of the cargo hold felt it. A deep, resonant hum that vibrated in their bones, followed by a profound, soul-shaking silence. Then light. Not the harsh, sterile light of the terminal, but the warm, gentle light of a rising sun, pouring in through the loading bay doors, which now stood wide open. They stumbled out, cautiously, into the morning air. They were not at the silent, dead airport. They were on a mountainside under a clear blue sky. The air was crisp and cool. Below them, a lush, green valley stretched to the horizon. There were no signs of wreckage, no smoke, no fire. The mountain was pristine, beautiful, untouched. It was a place of impossible peace. Their clothes were clean. Their injuries were gone. Liam looked at his hands, expecting to see the scrapes from his frantic escape, but they were unblemished. The O'Connell family stood together, whole and unharmed. They were all there, all of the survivors who had made it to the cargo bay. But Eva, Lena, Kenji, and the strange, sad girl they had brought back were gone. As they stood in stunned silence, they heard a sound, the unmistakable whir of helicopter blades. A rescue chopper was descending into the valley below, then another, and another. They had been found, they were saved. But as they were flown to a nearby town, as they were processed by bewildered authorities, the true nature of their new reality became clear. No one had ever heard of Oceanic Airlines. Flight 815 did not exist in any record. There had been no crash. The world they had returned to was almost identical to the one they had left, but with one crucial, fundamental difference. They had never been on that plane. According to this world's history, they had all missed their flight for different mundane reasons. A traffic jam, a misplaced passport, a sudden illness. They were anomalies, people who were not supposed to be on this mountain, who had no memory of the last few weeks according to the rest of the world. They were ghosts who had found their way back into the pages of a book that had already been written. Months later, the survivors tried to move on, to integrate into a world that both was and was not their own. They were forever bound by a shared, secret trauma that no one else could ever understand. One evening, the young O'Connell boy, who had not spoken of the events since their rescue, was drawing at the kitchen table. His mother came to see what he had made. It was a picture of the superjumbo jet, flying through a starry sky. She smiled sadly, about to tell him not to dwell on it. Then she looked closer. In the cockpit window, he had drawn 4 smiling stick figures, and in the rows of passenger windows he had drawn dozens more. She counted them. Including the 4 in the cockpit, there were 488 figures on the plane, but the boy had drawn one more, a tiny, extra figure standing on the wing, waving. "Who is that?" she asked her son, her voice a whisper. The boy looked up from his drawing, his eyes clear and calm. "That's the plane," he said. "It has a soul now, they all do." He went back to his drawing, adding more stars to the sky, a universe for the ghost flight to explore, a new directive for a new journey, crewed by the paradoxes that had sacrificed everything to create it. A flight with no destination, forever navigating the quiet, endless spaces between the worlds. The end.